Hey, how are we doing, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today we're talking some sad and unfortunate Week 15 fantasy football rankings. The reason I say that is if you've been tuned in to the sports world for the last 24 to 48 hours, what a rough time we've had with all of the players who are now ineligible or have their availability for this week largely up in the air due to obviously being on, in our case for football here, the COVID-19 reserve, and being, again, ineligible to play in contests. So this video is coming out on Friday morning here. That means that Thursday Night Football has already happened. So top names at the wide receiver position, like Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, potentially Mike Williams for your lineups as well, have already played their games. So we are not going to be discussing those players in today's episode. Rather, this top 24 rankings list will be with all of the players remaining after that bunch is now removed from the situation. So let me know down in the comment section below, what players are you without this week? We've had a heavy amount of players. In particular, the Cleveland Browns have gotten hit the hardest with now 20 plus cases racking up against their team, including their top two quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield and Case Keenum. So it's been a disastrous, again, 24 hours. Jalen Waddle's out. Allen Robinson, you probably weren't starting him anyways, but he's now out of, or he's in COVID protocols. And we've also got some other names like Tyler Lockett, who has been added to that list as well. So the list goes on and on. The players are currently just piling up one after the next. Please don't come after me in this video. The chances are, by the time this video goes up and you'll be seeing it, there might be more players on this list who have contracted the virus. So we potentially might not have availability to some of these names either. But if that is the case, or after I post this video and players are ruled out of contests, I will pin that in a comment within a reasonable amount of time after that news breaks, so you all are updated and have that information as you're watching today's video. So it's been a crazy week. I may post running back rankings tomorrow as well. Obviously, the closer to game time, honestly, the better, because at this point, anything can change at any given moment. So that was a lot of talking, a lot of stuff to break down. We'll chat about stuff here in today's episode. Let's hit the intro and let's get started. Alrighty, here we go. So today, as we get into today's episode, make sure to drop down and leave today's episode with a like, especially if you're hurting from one of your players being lost to COVID-19 or injury, whatever the case might be. These are the biggest times of the fantasy football season as we are now into the playoff schedule, so it really stinks that we're losing a lot of names, but we're going to try and make the best of it here. Of course, as always, if you have questions about your lineups, you can put those in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to be a resource for you all to pick up those dubs this week. So, number one here, not too much to talk about, Cooper Kupp. He's been the number one player on the list basically every week now since the early stages of the season. He's got the highest floor, and he's also got a pretty dang good ceiling as well. He's coming off 15 targets against the Cardinals last week, so another astronomical performance for him. He is virtually uncoverable in the slot. The Rams better bubble wrap Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford and make sure they are not lost to obviously the illness and stuff that we're seeing other players right now. Davante Adams at number 2 from the Green Bay Packers. Something interesting to note about Davante Adams is that he has already been in COVID protocols this season, so I'd have to check on exactly how long it's been since then, but I believe there's a roughly 60-day grace period after you test positive for the virus where the NFL doesn't test you any longer because they don't consider you someone who is at risk to retract the virus. So Davante Adams might be in the clear here for the fantasy football playoffs in terms of availability. Now, the NFL did just update their policy, which is something that I glanced briefly at, but essentially what I got was that they're going to be meeting virtually and not allowing players to meet with people outside of the team facility. So I'm not sure how that plays into Adams' situation. Just something to touch on if you happen to have a player who's already had this issue early on in the season. This might apply to you. But Davante Adams here at the number 2 position. Look, 13 targets last week, 121 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Bears. Him and Aaron Rodgers, their connection is starting to ramp up here down the stretch of this season. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers' pinky toe, the TOVID that he suffered through earlier on this season, and is continuing to deal with here. Hopefully that pain management goes okay and we can keep this duo every game down the stretch here. As long as he doesn't get stepped on, it sounds like Davante's going to have his quarterback. So this beat up Baltimore secondary secondary this week is a very juicy matchup, something I think he can easily exploit. They've lost like their top 3 corners, including Marlon Humphrey, who was just recently lost here, dating back to Marcus Peters, and earlier on in the offseason, they've lost some other names as well. So it's an injury-decimated secondary. Their cornerback group is desperately looking for players to step up and make plays. This has been one of the teams that has gotten the short end of the stick in the injury department, has some of the most players on the injury reserve in the league. I think the Packers offense steps up to the plate here and delivers on Sunday. Justin Jefferson, speaking of players having success against the Chicago Bears secondary, Justin Jefferson is someone I expect to absolutely massacre that back end here. We talked about Davante Adams, that 13-target, 121-yard performance, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Justin Jefferson has been on a tear lately and has arguably been one of the hottest wide receivers, not named Cooper Kupp, posting 140 or more receiving yards. Let's just pause for a second. That is a ridiculous total. 140 or more receiving yards in 3 of his last 5 games. So he absolutely has what it takes to stretch the field, be a dominant alpha receiver, and go out there and change the pace of football games. We've seen him be very, very productive the last month plus of the season. He's been a very good receiver this whole year, but he's giving us his best production right now when it matters, and that is huge. Stefon Diggs, another one of these big ceiling wide receivers here. He is playing against the Carolina secondary this week that has pretty much been regressing since the early stages of the year when they looked like they were going to be one of the top secondaries in the National Football League. But since then, they've been giving up more plays, struggling offensively, which has resulted in defensive woes because their defense is on the field longer, their offense can't sustain drives, and they're getting more tuckered out back there. Since week 6, Diggs only has 1 game with fewer than 10.5 fantasy points in half PPR, so you're getting great consistency. And then, of course, that quarterback-wide receiver combination, having Josh Allen under center, is a huge bonus. Diontae Johnson at number 5 here. Remember, these are post-Thursday Night Football rankings, so we've already had, again, Tyreek, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams already off the list for today's episode. So Diontae Johnson, he gives you every week a great level of consistency. Last week against the Vikings, he notched his 10th double-digit target game of this season. That is elite volume. Few wide receivers are able to replicate those numbers in a week-in, week-out basis, and Diontae Johnson does just that. He gives you, again, that consistent floor with the potential to have a nice boom ceiling performance. That's something we've seen a little bit as of late as well. He can stretch the field. He had a really nice long catch against Minnesota last week. And with that underneath volume he gets, again, you're looking at a player who's basically going to give you reliable numbers every single game. Chris Godwin at number 6 here. He has been a volume machine. He set the franchise record for receptions for Tampa Bay back in week 13. This past week, he had another 10 looks as well. And he's coming into a matchup against the Saints in which that is the opponent he's had his best fantasy point production throughout the 2021 season. Godwin had 8 catches, 140 yards, and a touchdown, 24 points in half PPR week 8 against New Orleans. This is that big slot wide receiver Tom Brady loves to throw the football to. He's uber dependable, has great hands. He can come up big in this situation. Now, Tampa has been a team that has struggled against the Saints since Tom Brady arrived here, but Chris Godwin showed us earlier on this season that he's able to overcome that. Deebo Samuel at number 7 here now. Deebo has really transitioned away from being a prototypical NFL wide receiver into more of a hybrid role as a running back. In his last 4 games, he actually only has a total of 12 receptions, which is averaging 3 per game, three catches per contest. So that's a really, really low marker to have someone at that is all the way up here on the list at the number 7 position. However, it's been the work that Deebo's been doing in the backfield as a running back, quote unquote. There's a little bit of Cordero Patterson-esque situation here where he is getting not a workhorse level of volume in the backfield, but the explosiveness, the physicality he has after receiving the football. He's a dominant player, and again, that explosiveness is what's key here. It is a tough job and a tough ask for defenses to get him down on first contact. If he breaks into the second level of the defense, he's a really tough matchup for any corner or safety to bring down in the league. So Deebo Samuel, you also give me a player who's still lining out wide and catching some passes per game. Again, 3 of those looks is better than nothing, certainly, but obviously not that elite level territory. It's the talent that we're buying into here. The matchup is fantastic. Atlanta's a weaker secondary outside of A.J. Terrell. So I think there'll be a situation for Deebo Samuel to get out there. He's arguably their most dynamic, most explosive offensive player. Kyle Shanahan's going to make sure he gets the football, although as of late, it's become a bit more odd in the ways that he's doing so. Ceedee Lamb at number 8 here. You love the upside with Dak Prescott in this Dallas Cowboys passing offense. Ceedee Lamb's a great talent. He's the wide receiver in this offense, receiving the most volume and looks per week. And this is a run game for Dallas that has been deteriorating here over the backstretch of the season, especially now that Tony Pollard is dealing with injuries. Now, he's theoretically questionable. A game-time decision has the opportunity to play here, but that's not something I would overly rely on because I think his injury is going to cost him to miss more time than just 1 week here. So in a game in which the Giants not only have a strong defensive front and I think can make an honest effort to shut down Zeke and what's left of him in this Dallas offense, I think that the Cowboys will be forced to lean back on the passing game and talents like Ceedee Lamb to get the job done. Mike Evans at number 9 here against New Orleans, another Tampa Bay receiver here in the top 10 of production. Evans is just a touchdown waiting to happen. That's what his most strong point of productivity has been since Tom Brady arrived in Tampa Bay. He already has 11 touchdown grabs on the season. The one thing to look out for here is back in Week 8 when the Saints played the Bucs the first time this season, Evans had just 4 targets and 2 receptions on those 4 looks for 48 yards. However, he did find the end zone for a touchdown. So again, you're betting on the touchdown productivity here for Mike Evans in this Buccaneers offense. Things are a little bit better, and I would actually go as far to say they are much better in terms of the volume he receives and the floor value he has with Antonio Brown off the field. But having talented players in the secondary like a Marshawn Lattimore is obviously something that can impose a significant roadblock to Evans having a super high production game here. I just find him cracking the top 10 being a more reliable receiver than some of the other names we have on the list. Jamar Chase slides down here at the number 10 position now. After last week's big game, 5 grabs, 77 yards, 2 touchdowns, he is trending up the list. However, this week he does have his work cut out for him, playing against what, in my estimation, is the best rookie cornerback this season and someone who's going to be a shutdown defensive back for years to come in Patrick Surtain. Jamar Chase is going to have his hands full, so it's not going to be any easy sledding here. You're looking at Jamar Chase every week, basically, as an electric wide receiver who needs to capitalize on a big play in order to give you fantasy production. Joe Burrow's going to give him multiple shots. He's going to give him looks and opportunities to do so. This is a matchup, though, where I think that there is a solid chance he has a bust-worthy performance and isn't someone that is the most dependable option. But again, we saw it happen last week. He's an electric player. He separates from defensive backs, has great awareness. Joe Burrow hit him for 2 big improvising touchdowns. He's a big playmaker, and obviously that's something that we love to see. You really can't find a situation where you're going to sit him down and bench him because it's hard to find an option that has as much upside as Chase does. But again, I am a little concerned about the floor with Surtain this week. DK Metcalf rising back up to the number 11 position. Now, the production the last 5 weeks indicates anything other than a player who deserves a number 1 wide receiver ranking here. However, what I will say is that with Tyler Lockett now looking to be out with his placement on the COVID reserve, this opens up the opportunity for DK Metcalf to have a late season resurgence here. He has not had more than 60 yards receiving since Russell Wilson's return from his finger injury. That's a big red flag. But in this matchup against the Rams, he does have, again, no Lockett on the field going for him. Alex Collins is also out with COVID. So there's going to be opportunities for DK, who's also had a handful of 8-target games since Russell Wilson's return. So the opportunities are going to be there. Jalen Ramsey on the other side of the ball is also not someone who's shadowing opposing wide receivers this season. So the Seahawks can manipulate their offensive scheme and formation to get him away from Ramsey. I think that there will at least be the opportunity for Metcalf to have that ceiling. Hunter Renfrow could go absolutely nuts here. I have him at the number 12 position. Cleveland is the matchup for the Raiders here. Now, who knows? Like I said, a lot can change before this video goes out. We are recording it late on Wednesday evening. You never know. If the COVID cases keep piling up for the Browns, they might delay or cancel this game. But if things stay on track here, if the Raiders do end up playing against the Browns, which I fully anticipate it being the case, And I would be shocked if the stuff I just mentioned plays out here. But if the Raiders line up across from this Cleveland team decimated and missing like half their starters, especially on the defensive side of the ball, namely Troy Hill, their slot corner, has been placed on the reserve list. Renfrow could go absolutely nuts. No Darren Waller again this week, so you don't have to worry about much competition for targets in this offense. Renfrow's fresh off of a 13-reception game against Kansas City, and in 5 of his last 6 games, he has 13.5 or more points in half PPR. So you're looking at a absolute monster of a route runner, someone who separates very well, finds the open space and zone coverage. This is a fantastic asset to have in those PPR leagues. T. Higgins at number 13 here, now moving into the wide receiver 2 section of today's list. T. Higgins, he's got 10 points or more in 5 of his last 6 games, again, per half PPR scoring, and he has, frankly, been the more consistent wide receiver than Jamar Chase over the last 5-6 weeks of this season. T isn't necessarily the number 1 in this offense, but he is seeing the secondary coverage be lighter than it is on Jamar Chase, and they're paying him less respect because they view Chase as a bigger threat to the defense. However, T. Higgins has an awesome frame. He has excellent athleticism, and he is a dang good wide receiver in his own right. I said this earlier on a couple weeks ago. I was shocked when the Bengals drafted Jamar Chase. I thought they'd go the route of Penei Sewell and protecting Joe Burrow because I thought they could move forward with T. Higgins as the number 1 pass catcher in this offense. He is that talented. He does have that much upside and potential as a player. However, he's the number 2 now, and he is feasting on teams' second and third best corners every week. He's got a really nice upside. He doesn't have to score a touchdown to produce because he can make plays downfield and win contested grabs. Fantastic player. Again, Denver's secondary is a respectable opponent, so it's not something where I'm expecting him to go completely berserk this week, like a Jamar Chase, who we're also managing our expectations for, but T has been very reliable here as of late. Moving into my number 14 wide receiver now, Brandon Cooks of the Houston Texans, taking on, the Jacksonville Jaguars here, who he played back in week 1. Cooks in that contest was able to haul in 5 catches, 132 yards. That was an impressive game. Tyrod Taylor was the quarterback back then in week 1. There's been a switch since that point in time in which Davis Mills is now the rest of season starter for this Texans team. Cooks last week had 8 grabs, 101 yards against the Seattle defense. That's a big deal considering that quarterback change. So this time around against Jacksonville, seeing the 11 targets he had last week, I have no reason to believe that he should have a quiet game in this matchup. If Cooks finds the end zone, I believe he could have a very nice fantasy performance and possibly outproduce the ranking I have him penciled in at here for this week. He's the most explosive player in this Texans offense. He's the best skill position asset they have. As long as Davis Mills feeds him the football, I think he's got a great shot to produce. Now, there is always the question with Urban Meyer kicked out the door now. Maybe the Jags will rally here, show their true potential, and shut down the Texans team that whooped up on him in week 1. But I don't think that'll be the case here. I think that the talent is fairly even between these two rebuilding dumpster fires of franchises, but I think Cooks will get his numbers in this contest. Brandon Ayuk at number 15 against Atlanta. I'd love to have Ayuk higher, but when you've got Deebo Samuel and George Kittle in this offense, that's obviously something you have to factor in here. I do think that Ayuk taking on the second best corner at times in this matchup. Now, he is traditionally, or I shouldn't say traditionally, he's technically the more traditional wide receiver player in this offense. He is the most pure wide receiver as opposed to Deebo Samuel, who's more of that dynamic threat right now. So Brandon Ayuk is probably going to run more routes than Deebo Samuel will this week. That could result in him seeing more coverage from A.J. Terrell, who again is the respectable opponent and cornerback on this Falcons roster. But if they can find ways to manipulate coverage and get him onto the second and third defensive backs for this team, Brandon Ayuk can absolutely feast in this matchup. Again, when Deebo Samuel's out there and if he lines up towards A.J. Terrell, that's going to set up some big play opportunities for Ayuk, who scored the game-winning touchdown for the San Francisco 49ers against the Cincinnati Bengals last week. So a lot of talent. We love Ayuk here at SFS. I think this is another matchup where he is a must-start player and has the opportunity for some high-end production. DJ Moore now here at the number 16 spot. Let's not forget heading into this matchup against the Buffalo Bills, which earlier on this season would have been classified as a very tough matchup for this Panthers passing game. Tre'Davious White is out for the season. So that means that while there are some other talented corners still on this Bills roster, you're not getting one of the top 3 best corners at the position matched up across from him. So the biggest issue for Moore this week, I will pencil up to being the quarterback play. Cam Newton somehow remains the team's starting quarterback despite being benched like literally every week that he has been named the starter since returning to that role for Carolina. So DJ's always got a high ceiling. He's a player who makes big, explosive chunk yardage plays down the field. It's just going to come down to the fact that he doesn't have the nicest floor. This could be a matchup in which the Panthers get mopped off the field. The Bills are probably embarrassed after dropping some games as of late. And I think that, again, it's going to come down to ball placement and the ability for Carolina, Cam Newton in particular, maybe PJ Walker late in the contest, to get him the football in the right spots to make plays. But again, it's not something that's guaranteed. Those players have been struggling as of late. It's been a quarterback carousel. And Sam Darnold is potentially in the mix to maybe return. So there's a lot of things at play here. We don't really know what the quarterback situation is going to be. Whoever it is, they have all struggled at points this season. They have all presented us with reasons why they should not be starting quarterbacks, and they have all given us reasons for concern as it relates to DJ Moore's fantasy value. So keep that in mind as we move forward here. DJ Moore does have a nice ceiling, but the floor is not all that reliable. Amari Cooper now moving into our number 17 player, taking on the Giants this week. Hauled in 5 grabs for 51 yards and a touchdown against the Washington football team in week 14. I'll be honest, it felt like Amari Cooper had a lot of a larger presence in this matchup than what the stats actually indicate here. But that's how things go sometimes. I feel like he was involved in a lot of the big plays in that contest, and not exactly tuning in directly to this football game, but watching on Red Zone, there's a potential that he made some plays that were called back that I was not aware of. But Cooper did play in a style and in a fashion that was very impressive to me last week. The 5 receptions is nothing crazy, nothing to get overly excited about. And of course, now that that wide receiver trio is back to full strength with Ceedee Lamb and Michael Gallup in there, there are a lot of mouths to feed. But as always, Amari Cooper remains a big play threat, a boom-bust player as far as fantasy classification goes. He does not have a very safe floor. This is a player who will let you down on frequent occasion, but he can have games like last week where he was a lineup worthy start. Again, he's a boom-bust wide receiver too, with a high ceiling here as he moves into this matchup against the Giants. Marquise Brown, so now we're getting into players who are very talented, but I think have some tougher situations facing them on the other side of the football field. Taking on the Green Bay Packers here, and honestly, this is more to do with the health of Lamar Jackson than it actually is the player that Marquise Brown is. Lamar is up in the air, and it sounds like it could go down to as far as right before kickoff as it relates to whether or not Jackson's actually out there and playing for Baltimore. So we don't really know if it's going to be him or Tyler Huntley here this week. I think that Brown has his work cut out for him as it is, taking on the Packers, whose secondary, despite not having Jair Alexander for a long while this season, has been playing phenomenal. Rasul Douglas has been an interception artist and getting pick sixes here in back-to-back games. And now you talk about Eric Stokes, the rookie corner, who, as far as speed goes, can match Marquise Brown down the field. So there are 2 players on the boundary that I think Marquise really is going to have a tough time matching up against. And if his quarterback is not the former MVP Lamar Jackson, that can just add fuel to the defensive fire of having a tough matchup. So keep an eye on the situation. Obviously, who the quarterback is has a large impact on Marquise Brown's fantasy outlook for this week. If he's a fringe play in your roster, make sure that you are taking the time to look at what the situation has early on Sunday morning for Hollywood and this Ravens offense and making the best decision for your teams. Terry McLaurin, another wide receiver that has a lot of talent. We love Terry McLaurin as an athlete, but it's hard to trust him in our fantasy lineups. He's playing against Darius Slay and the Philadelphia Eagles defense this week, and his quarterback Taylor Heineke is a bit banged up right now. Kyle Allen also went into COVID protocols, so potentially some red flags and issues there. I think the matchup, again, is tough, not something that's always as a welcome sight when you see how inconsistent he is, even in advantageous matchups, just because of, again, QB play. It's similar to DJ Moore, not having reliable ball placement and having quarterbacks that can put the football into tight windows. So Terry McLaurin could have a sky-high ceiling every given week, However, again, in this tough matchup, the floor is not something I'm feeling too great about. Michael Pittman, another one of those players, big upside, big player, can make those contested grabs. As always, is a red zone threat, and you expect Carson Wentz to throw the football up and give him a couple of opportunities game in and game out, but you're playing against Bill Belichick, arguably the best defense in the league right now. On paper, this matchup doesn't look so great. You've got J.C. Jackson in the secondary, you've got a talented safety tandem, and you've also got a very deep secondary group at the cornerback position. So if there's double coverage thrown his way, whatever Bill decides to do in this matchup, I expect it to be a difficult situation for Michael Pittman to succeed. He's probably going to have to score a touchdown or haul in a couple of monster jump ball situations to have a really strong wide receiver outing here. He's someone I would be a little bit more conservative on my expectations for him heading into this Week 15 matchup. Darnell Mooney here at number 21, a player who I think has a higher ceiling than both potentially Pittman or even a Marquise Brown this week, but again, doesn't have the safest floor in the world. That is the trend here with a lot of players at the bottom of the list today, at least for our wide receiver twos post Thursday Night Football. This Minnesota secondary, though, is straight up trash. They get beat on frequent occasion. They, every once in a while, will have a contest where their pass rush is just lethal and their corners don't have to cover for very long. But when the corners are asked to drop back and play coverage, they get beat, and they get beat badly. We saw that happen last week with Pittsburgh when they were rallying back. Chase Clownpool lost them on multiple occasions down the field. We saw Diontae Johnson win a couple of deep releases in that game. And this has been happening all season long, as it also has been happening to the Bears secondary. So Darnell Mooney being the theoretical number one wide receiver now in this offense, he's kind of surpassed Allen Robinson in terms of the looks he's getting per week. And Allen Robinson is also out with COVID. So another instance where this is playing a factor in the role of fantasy lineup projections for this week. I think that Mooney has the opportunity to go out here, be Justin Fields' number one target in this football game, and potentially, if he gets enough volume, he can put up some really nice numbers. We saw him doing great things right around the time of Thanksgiving and the couple of weeks prior to that earlier on this year. So the talent is there. He just needs the volume and the opportunity, and if that is there, he will be able to produce. Here he is, Chase Clownpool at the number 22 spot. It pains me to have him on the list, as I really do not like Chase Claypool. But when you're playing the Tennessee Titans secondary, and when you've already got players taken off the list from Thursday night, when you've got the fact that this is just a great matchup for almost any team that heads their way, you got to put him on the list and at least give him his respect there. I would actually kind of be somewhat afraid that Mike Tomlin might discipline him and cut his snaps a little bit, just because of the multitude of stupid things he did last week, from taunting penalties, or it was actually unnecessary roughness, I believe, for what was virtually taunting after the play. The first down celebration that wasted 10 seconds of the game clock, roughly. I think it was actually 12 seconds when the Steelers were trying to get down and potentially have a couple shots at the end zone there. So overall, the antics of Chase Claypool set aside, he is a talented player. He can win jump balls. He's got a lot of speed in the open field. If he gets open downfield, Big Ben throws the ball up to him, he could have another nice ceiling, some upside here. I unfortunately will have to start Chase Claypool this week, as Jalen Waddle has contracted COVID, so that makes my life a little bit less fun, because I have to cheer for somebody that I don't tend to love that much as a player. But he's talented. He should make big plays here in this matchup, or at least we'll have the opportunity to. Chase Claypool deserves wide receiver 2 consideration in this game. Van Jefferson, another player I think has some really nice upside. In particular, with OBJ having COVID, there is the opportunity for him to miss that game. So maybe an increased workload for Van in this matchup. He is a really talented player in his own right. He is a lethal field stretcher. He has really good straight line speed. He can actually run routes to a respectable level as well. As a young player in this offense, he's got a lot of room to grow, and with his role potentially expanding against Seattle in this matchup, that's something you love to see as well. You look back to last week, Brandon Cooks, another explosive wide receiver, not the same body type, but a fast player who can stretch the field, had a very good game against this defense, and you get a quarterback who is much better than Davis Mills and Matthew Stafford, having the opportunity to utilize Van as a number 2 option. That is something that could result in big ceiling potential. And then Christian Kirk. This is a really interesting one for me. So no D-Hop, it sounds like, for the rest of this season. He sustained an injury late in that ball game against the Rams. Christian Kirk and A.J. Green are now going to be thrust into the spotlight for the top dogs in this passing offense. Now, Christian Kirk is a little bit more of the big play type. He is certainly someone who is capable of winning contested catches here and there. There was actually once upon a time earlier on this season where he was a top 24 wide receiver. He was penciled in as the wide receiver 22 in half PPR scoring. But when Kyler went down with his injury and missed some time, that's fallen off a little bit here. And there's been always kind of the blurred lines between Christian Kirk, A.J. Green, and Rondale Moore for those wide receiver 2, 3, and 4 spots. They've been relatively streaky. Their production has not been all that reliable, as you'd expect when you have an offense that can line up 4 guys wide or even 5 wide if you add Zach Ertz or even Chase Edmonds when he's healthy. Heck, James Conner now into the situation. This is just such a lethal passing offense. But now you're really looking to Christian Kirk and A.J. Green as that number 1, in quotation marks there, wide receiver for this team. Again, there's no real clear distinction. I think they're both very capable options to get the job done, especially in a matchup against the Lions this week, which their secondary has not actually played all that bad or as bad as you would expect. Now, they aren't being passed on late in games because they're usually losing by so much, which helps their stats a little bit here. But overall, this defense plays really hard. They play physical football, but this is just a talent mismatch when you add in Kyler Murray into the situation. The run game of the Cardinals, which has really taken a step forward as of late, or at least the production of the running backs, not necessarily their raw rushing numbers. And I think this is a situation he can succeed in now with Hopkins, the number 1, the clear number 1 in this offense, now removed from the situation, it sounds like, at least until the postseason. So he's dealt with some tough injuries this year. That kind of sucks to see, but as always, next man up mentality, and I think that Christian Kirk can capitalize on the opportunity here. All right, those were my top 24 wide receivers here. Again, post Thursday Night Football, so no Keenan Allen, Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman if you want to go there, Mike Williams. All those guys have been taken off the board because they've already played their matchups this week. And again, I wanted to make this episode because of all of the crazy COVID cases, injuries, and all that stuff that is resulting in a lot of missing players this week. So a lot of stuff to talk about. If you have questions, I know teams are a mess right now, so put those down in the comment section below, and I'll get back to as many of you guys as possible. But as always, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.